Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this Monday night in-depth ag forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. Over the last 48 hours, we've seen some incredibly beneficial rains that have moved through parts of the Midwest. Parts of Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin saw some much-needed rainfall. As the storms, though, that rolled through this area got into parts of northern Illinois, southern Michigan, northern Indiana, and then eventually over here to parts of the eastern Great Lakes, though today there was quite a bit of severe weather, including some very strong straight-line wind damage going through this area. I don't yet know the extent of the damage, but I'll show you the storm reports in just a few moments. We've seen storms build down the line all the way down into parts of Oklahoma and Texas, even hitting parts of Kansas, which has been exceptionally dry. But this is all a part of a system that's rolling through the Great Lakes that will move into New England tomorrow and then give way to a lot of higher pressure and much drier conditions behind that. And as that occurs, we're going to talk about the return of quite a bit of moisture down south as the Gulf opens up and tropical activity really gets going. Now, just this evening, I was watching the storms on radar, but I also wanted to point you again to one of my favorite resources. If you're kind of new to watching my content, blitzertongue.org, one of my favorite websites to look at live lightning data. And again, we can see where some of these storms continue to ride on that frontal boundary farther to the south here, from Illinois all the way back down to parts of New Mexico and Texas and everywhere in between. Now, as I said earlier today, those storms, as they came out of Iowa this morning, got into and over the river, and then once they got to about this part in Illinois, which saw some flooding, like up here near Rockford over the weekend, those storms just took off again today and produced several reports of severe winds, as you can see in through this area. Throughout the rest of the Midwest, getting into the Mid-South, part of the Mid-South here, and then the Southern Plains, also some other pockets that saw some strong to severe storms. As we watch the sun set tonight, you can see those storms again. So let me just take you back right to when they really got going. Oop, there was some lost data there. Here they are. So you watch these storms here just build right down a line over Indiana, Michigan, and then getting into Ohio, and then the storms that were racing out ahead of it. But a lot of deep convection on the backside of this low, which is still spinning around up here. Now, what was neat about this animation is I was keeping an eye on New Mexico and Texas. And you can actually see a little low that's circulating down here. Watch as they go back and forth. See how the storms are kind of orbiting around that low. Another thing to point out here is that these storms that were in parts of North South Carolina and down into Georgia had a very nice outflow boundary on them, pushing back to the northwest. That's just kind of a neat feature to be on the lookout for. And lastly, as the sun was setting, we could see the wildfire smoke in Northern California. And this is going to be an area of great concern for me over the coming 10 plus days as a very, very large ridge moves into that region. I'm going to come back to that in just a few seconds. First, I just want to hit quickly on the tropics. As we look at the latest satellite data today, we're kind of keeping an eye on a few different areas. First, this is the lead wave out in the Atlantic that we're going to watch most carefully. This is the one the National Hurricane Center has given an 80% chance of organizing. It looks quite disorganized at this point, but we're going to just keep an eye on it because the models have been aggressive with it. The wave following will likely stay here in the North Atlantic and not threaten land, but I just want to tell you, this is the time of year where you see these large clusters of thunderstorms here in the Gulf or in the Caribbean or just off the southeast coast. While we don't anticipate any of these doing it, this is the time of year where these types of thunderstorms can really quickly develop into weak tropical disturbances, which can then develop into tropical storms. So what are we watching right now? Well, the major area of concern is here. The National Hurricane Center's kept this at 80% all day. This is the 8 p.m. Monday night update, and you can kind of see there that we're watching for the possible gradual development of this. I'll tell you what they mean by marginally conducive environment that's out ahead of it in just a second. The wave that's behind it here has been upgraded to a 40% chance of developing. And using one of my favorite sites to kind of look at the possible tracks, I'll link this one for you so you've got it. We're looking here at where these next two systems could possibly go. So in a few moments, we'll kind of explain why, should this move north of the Lesser Antilles and get north of the Bahamas, most forecast model runs take it on a pretty hard turn back into open ocean. Even if it follows this southern track, there's still a good evidence that it will run into an upper level trough here that's going to shove it off to open ocean. Then we see the system behind it largely stays in open ocean, meaning that this one's not going to be one at this point we anticipate coming across the open Atlantic Ocean. But again, let's just watch the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico carefully in these coming days. Now, part of the reason why this system has a better chance of surviving is kind of seen in the near surface winds here. So what we're looking at is the wind's about a mile above our heads. Here's that open wave we're keeping an eye on. And should it develop, there's now a ridge of high pressure here, and the flow's coming around it something like this. What's important here is that for a while we had this setup where it's kind of highly amplified, but there was a trough that kind of cut through here, increasing the wind shear. Well, that seems to be gone. And now the flow is a little bit more conducive to guiding this system and reducing that wind shear, possibly letting it survive. There's still some pretty dry air on the northern side of this, which we're going to have to contend with, but we'll keep a close eye on that as we go forward. Now, once again, what we're watching is the timing of this with the eventual progression of this trough right there. That could be the main feature that kicks this one out. I'll show you that in a few seconds. But before I do that, though, I need to let you know about some other tropical activity here over in the Pacific. Pretty large typhoon sitting here that is going to move toward Taiwan before it's forecast to turn back to the north and run over parts of Japan. We can see that here in the forecast maps. And why we're watching this one carefully is we're at that time of year where the turn of these tropical systems, like this, can often have their low pressure kind of absorbed into the jet stream level flow, enhancing or amplifying the trough ridge pattern that runs across the North Pacific. We've seen this time in and time again, so it's just what we need to be paying attention to here. I don't know yet if it's going to do that. There's not a whole lot of evidence that it's going to be absorbed into the flow and then cause a massive disruption, meaning that our pattern over the next 15 days, which is what I want to show you next, is largely going to be dominated by the continual troughs in this area. So as we play this forward, here's the short wave, okay, that's out ahead. This is the one that's producing the low that's here, bringing that front end that initiated all that severe weather. Well, that trough, watch right here, it moves into New England tomorrow, and it sweeps on through by Wednesday into Thursday. So that's where we're going to watch for the storms to move. They're going to move along the East Coast. Behind it, a very large ridge builds in as this highly amplified pattern takes place. And that ridge is going to grow throughout the end of the week and into the weekend. And we're concerned about, by the time we get into Saturday and Sunday, that this ridge could open up to be actually a 600 decameter ridge at 6,000 meters in height for the 500 millibar height field. And I'm just saying, that's a big ridge. But this dominant trough here sets up a high amplitude pattern. We have a ridge that sits here, so the flow comes around it and just pulls moisture into the southern United States. As long as that ridge is parked in this place here, there's going to be ample moisture coming into the southern U.S., but it'll be dry. As the flow comes over the ridge this time of year, that's a drier signal. It's not like it is in early and midsummer. It's a drier signal for this area. And this pattern lasts past next weekend out into the second week of September. And it isn't really until we get out there about day 8 or 9 in the forecast, really about day 9, that the models are spreading things out a bit too much and losing their consistency. So we don't really have a lot of confidence beyond about day 10 in the timing of any system at this point because of this change. But in the meantime, your next 15 days looks something like this. As these storms that are in this area tonight move toward the northeast, higher pressure comes in to dry things out behind it. But with the open transport of moisture around that subtropical ridge, we're going to see a lot of very wet weather here, where it's going to be drier in the mid-Atlantic, and that's primarily because the flow around that subtropical ridge comes over the mountains, and that's a drier signal for this part of the country. Will be drier in the northwest as well, as all the heat moves into that area. So this is kind of the main pattern setting up here. Now, as of late, where this rain is going to be coming in, it is not needed. Look at this part of Texas and Louisiana and Mississippi, where the month-to-date precipitation totals are looking like 600+% of normal. We have pockets just north of there that have been wet. Same thing in the upper Midwest, but it's been extremely dry in parts of Nebraska, central Kansas, into north central Oklahoma, with just a little bit of rain as of late coming through eastern Kansas. The monsoon, which has been so strong, is going to start to shift around a bit, and we're going to see that large ridge just run up the west coast of the United States. So where this is important is just to kind of see where we've gotten to at this point. So I showed this map in my morning report today, but I'll show it to you again. It's the August month-to-date precipitation ranks by climate district. And while Nebraska, parts of Kansas, and northern Oklahoma are having maybe a top 5 driest, and that does extend in places here, like over to western Illinois and parts of Indiana, Down here in the lower Mississippi River Valley, this is a wettest August on record. The earlier strength of the monsoon makes the desert southwest one of the wettest. We've got dryness because of the ridging that's not allowed systems to come into coastal Oregon and Washington. We're still battling drought in New England as well. So thinking about all of that, I want to show you the latest data from the ECMWF. It is giving you a very La Nina-like forecast for the time period of September 10 to October 10. As we've been talking about, the biggest wild card is any tropical development will throw this all off if a system can sneak into the Mississippi River Valley or come up as far north as the Tennessee Valley or exit through the Mid-Atlantic or even hit the New England area. That's all a possibility over the next 45 days or so. It's just that time of year. But if you left it up to La Nina to govern the overall flow, it's one of drier conditions for a bunch of us in the midsection of the United States. And I'll just point this out. We'll talk about it again at the end. There is no early indication of such a high amplitude pattern that there's like a big ridge here and a big ridge over the east and brutally cold air coming down in the midsection of the country, prompting an early frost. Do not see that happening, okay? What I do want to point out is that the La Nina still has its grip on the pattern. These ocean temperatures have maintained their strength at about 1 degree Celsius below normal, and the trade winds are absolutely screaming in this area. They just continue to come out of the east. Look at this block of blue in here, indicating where those trade winds are. And the westerly wind bursts out of the Indian Ocean are continuing as well. So like I've said in the last several videos, until this breaks, the MJO will float around in here in null space, not be a dominant player. And it's our other big tropical feature we tend to watch. So La Nina is still firmly in grip of this pattern, just like we discussed last week. What is important, though, is to kind of have a broader, bigger discussion about where this is going on a seasonal perspective. One of my favorite websites from Columbia University, we now have the new mid-August update on the probability of keeping La Nina in blue, neutral conditions in gray, and El Nino in red. And just as we've been discussing, there seems to be decent evidence that once we get into the start of winter, so I'm talking about the end of December and the beginning of January, that the likelihood of keeping this La Nina around for a full third year seems to be dwindling. And there just continues to be more evidence for that. And I want to present that case to you here. First of all, when we look historically, the big spikes down being La Ninas since 1950, the big spikes up being El Ninos, one thing I'd like to point out is that normally after a La Nina episode, okay, like this one, or here, or here, or here, any of them, the atmosphere often overcorrects toward El Nino pretty quickly. And if it does that this year, we could start winter discussing La Nina and then through the middle of it be pushing quickly into neutral conditions and possibly talking about El Nino conditions showing up in spring. That's a possibility with this pattern. And what's important to understand about that is that the model that's most aggressive with that switch is the CFSV2. That's a US model. What we're looking at here is upper level height anomalies for January, February, March. And what I'm concerned about is even though the CFSV2 is trying to turn this La Nina around, bringing it toward neutral conditions for that January, February, March time period, the forecast it's giving is not very non-La Nina. That makes sense? It's very La Nina, with a ridge here, the flow coming over the top and diving into the United States, and no hint of a subtropical component of the jet stream. And we cannot have that again this winter. California especially cannot have that again this winter. So their forecast is looking very La Nina-ish, even though they're trying to squash it. See that? Trying to bring these ocean temperatures back toward normal, really starting in December and bringing it forward. So this is what things look like when we were in La Nina last year. So January to March last year, look at the ridge. See it diving in here like this? No hint of a subtropical jet. That was our setup. So what's the difference between that and this? Even though that last year we were in the midst of a La Nina. If it's going to fade, it's going to have to change from this in a big way. So I do want to show you that using CPC's models, they are still giving us a La Nina looking January, February, March. That's where the flow comes over. It's wetter in the northwest. It dives, ejects through the Ohio River Valley, and that's where things stay wet. We're drier south, drier in the west, and California cannot have this. This is a no-go if they have a third winter that is as dry as being forecast. One last thing to point out, though, because I know we jumped way ahead to winter, there is still continued support from CPC for September, October, November that outside of any tropical systems will be drier here. Maybe some early onset precip for the wet season in the northwest, but we're going to watch the tropics carefully for systems to come through. What I'm trying to say here is if we do not have major tropical disruptions changing the pattern or delivering the tropical moisture, we'll have a great fall harvest, even though I know the crop is not what a lot of us want, and we'll also have a good fall application time period based on this information. Now, back to what we need to be discussing in the near term. The low that produced all that severe weather here is going to move into New England tomorrow, and they've got an area that's under marginal risk for tomorrow. To show you that, let's go right to the 18Z high-res NAM. So here we are this evening. There's all the storms that have been forecast. The models have been very poorly initialized, so don't take the timing and location of what you're seeing in these maps to be what will actually happen. It's more of an indicator on where the storms will be by the time we get to midday Tuesday, which is here. So this is the frontal boundary position. It's going to move into New England that evening, and I'm just going to say we'll watch this whole area for straight line wind damage possibilities with the storms that are rolling through here. The tail end of the front coming all the way back down into New Mexico. Now getting through Tuesday night and out into Wednesday, this whole pattern takes a pretty big shift. And to show you that, I'm going to look in the upper levels at spin, we call it vorticity. Now you ready? So keep an eye on this. This is the current wave that's moving through and ejects here in New England by Wednesday. The big ridge builds in behind it. Now coming over that ridge are a couple of very important pieces. This is the first trough by Friday, sneaking through. So this one's going to initiate the chance for some storms in the upper Midwest. And that trough sweeps through Ontario into Quebec. And then this guy right here, this little shortwave runs over the top of the ridge. And then it comes diving into the Great Lakes here by Monday the 5th. And what's interesting is that trough gets here and the flow goes like that. And this is that possible tropical system. It gets grabbed and pulled on off in this direction. Really neat to see that. I don't know. I think it's neat to look at the spin. So what we end up getting out of that pattern is this. This is your next 10 days looking at total accumulated precipitation as a percent of normal. And I'm going to show you how the higher pressure comes in here to bring in these drier conditions, but this gulf stays open and the possibility of a pretty narrow stream of moisture heads into this direction. So here we go. High-res European model 12Z run. We've already seen first this low curling through Ontario and Quebec, bringing its front through by Wednesday or Tuesday night to Wednesday morning, and that clears out. High pressure comes in, and that's going to be the theme in this area. Storms roll from Texas to the lower Mississippi River Valley and into the southeast. By the time we get into Friday and Saturday, remember that next low coming through? That's associated with that trough. It dragged that front into this area, saw some storms. But there's high pressure on this side and high pressure on the back side. So that pulls on through, and what's interesting is the flow around this high is opening up a lot of Gulf moisture. The flow on, maybe better position it here. There we go. Comes around like this, enhancing that front. So the net effect is next Saturday into Sunday, we see all this moisture getting pulled from the lower Mississippi River Valley into the Tennessee Valley, while high pressure sits in most other places around the country. And then finally, whatever comes out of this tropical system gets booted out as that short wave grabs all that moisture and takes a big low off in this direction. I really like this animation. See it? Just pushes it out of the way. Okay, so we put all that together and say how much rain. Well, let's do it quickly through Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, getting out there towards Saturday. So notice, drier here, much drier on this side, from all the way from the Canadian Prairie through the Midwest. Then we got into Monday and Tuesday. That's where the moisture gets pushed through the Tennessee Valley and back up into parts of New England. Okay, compare the models. The European's very wet. Much wetter than the GFS. The GFS is wetter on the backside. European is very wet on that system. So I just want to let you know that's going to be called into question until I see it evolve later this week. But if you look at the probability of getting an inch of rain over the next 10 days, the European ensemble has it as well. But drier on the backside of this. Remember, by day 10, we lose the overall features, I think, to the spread in the models. But one thing continues. This area stays open to Gulf moisture transport, and we see wetter weather there while we're drier on the backside. Now, as I was talking about, the real story here at the beginning was the heat that is in the western United States. And all day long, we've seen these heat watches turn over to excessive heat warnings. They've extended the heat watches, the excessive heat watches, into the Sacramento Valley. And now we got heat advisories in the Snake River Valley, Oregon, and the Columbia Basin. So these temperatures, these were today's. We've already seen these. There's Tuesday. Getting into Wednesday, see that heat really open up there. A lot of low 100s and upper 90s throughout the Pacific Northwest. Getting into Thursday, see the heat spreading as the ridge opens. Friday, same story. A lot of heat in the west. Getting into Saturday and Sunday, the weekend's quite mild for much of the northern tier of the United States, but still cool compared to normal down south. A lot due to cloud cover and daily storms. But beyond that, here's the 5-day sliding window of temperature anomalies through the first week of September and beyond. And what's important about this forecast is to see that even out there toward the end of it, we're not getting a real strong sense of a shot at really cold air through the middle of this month, just hammering parts of the northern plains, which will be bad. I just don't see it. I just want to keep you aware of that. From here, a couple of international things. South America. The new 45-day outlook or 46-day outlook, which gets us out to the 14th of October, did kind of double down on the wetter conditions across the north, meaning that if this verifies, we could have a very quick plant from Mato Grosso through Goiás and Tocantins over toward Minas Gerais and Bahia. The tricky spot to forecast will be in between there and what's forecast to be dry in Argentina, Uruguay, and Rio Grande do Sul. Will Paraná go over wet? Will Mato Grosso do Sul be wet? The reason I think we see the wetter conditions right here now is because of some better rains forecast just in the near term. So this continues to tell the same story as before, just a little bit wetter than it was down here in pockets of southern Brazil. From there, just to give you a quick update on China, the middle maps we're going to look at here are the 1-month drought severity index maps. These echo what we showed last week, where much of the drought is in southern China along and south of the Yangtze River. Some places it's, according to the CHIRPS data set, driest in a long time. When we look over the next 10 days, we continue to see hotter and drier conditions south, but cooler conditions a bit farther to the north. In Pakistan, where we saw all of that flooding over the weekend, we do see now drier conditions over the next week or so. And finally, just to give you a global perspective here, it is interesting to see going into spring, Australia's got some pretty good rains, and there's going to be some better rains in parts of Western Europe, including Great Britain and France, but drier here still, from Germany through Poland, Belarus, getting into Ukraine and this part of Russia. So we need to watch all of this carefully as we progress forward. So I appreciate the extra attention, and I got a lot to cover, but hopefully you found it informative, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks.